What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of What's in a Performance, the series where I take recordings, performances, videos, you name it, break them down, analyze them, pull them apart a little just to see what's going on behind the scenes, and then I make a video about it and put it on the tubes. Today, we're going to be looking at Chopin's Winter Wind as performed by the one and only CATEEN. I'm deviating from anti-piano for the first time, and I guess it's fitting because classical music is my alma mater, and so it's nice to step back into the world of classical and to give some great performances there a lesson as well. Of course, classical is a lot more contentious and people are a lot more opinionated, and so everything that I say is just my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me, feel free to have your own opinion, whatever, but this is just my take after all my years of playing and doing some performing as well. If you haven't heard Chopin's Winter Wind before, Opus 25, number 11, it is a technical feat, but there's also a lot of interesting musical elements that go on behind the scenes, like underneath all that technicality in order to make it work and sound amazing the way that it does. And to say that CATEEN'S performance is impressive would be a massive understatement. Of course, there are many other really great recordings of this out there, so you should go listen to them as well and maybe compare and contrast to see what someone like Murray Pariah does versus CATEEN or Valentino Lisitsa. This is all part of the fun of listening to classical music and hearing all these different interpretations. But with all that being said, let's get it. Alright, I've only ever read this etude and I've probably worked through like 1 or 2 pages for fun, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate much of anything. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yo, I feel like I'm gonna get trolled for always like stopping at the beginning of the video when like nothing has happened yet. But this is actually genuinely pretty interesting, what CATEEN's doing here to get the sound that he's going for. First off, it sounds like he's using left pedal. We can't see because he has the stand on, but like I remember his piano sounding brighter later. This is actually different, I think, from a lot of other recordings because a lot of other pianists like to play in such a way that it's piano, but it still rings, so that it still carries through a concert hall. And obviously he's playing this in his home. He's not playing in a concert hall, so perhaps it would be slightly different. But suffice it to say, it's an interesting choice first and foremost that he is already going for that soft pedal in order to create that sort of tonality. The other thing that's interesting is how flat his fingers are. It's almost like he's playing with this part of his finger and he's just coming up and down with his arm like this. I've talked about this sort of arm motion once before in one of my Beethoven videos that's really long and nobody's seen. It's this motion where you go up and down like this in order to have a lot of control. So essentially you're just playing with your arm weight coming up and down like this instead of lifting your finger. And you can see it in the video. And you see him rolling a little bit in. And you see, like I've talked before about how like fingers shouldn't collapse. His other fingers are blocking, but it kind of looks like his finger does collapse in order to give him the entire digit in order to be able to play the note that he wants. And again, right, with the up and down, now both hands, he's sliding in, right? Right, this is all to control the distribution of weight in order to create a softer tone. Ooh, I love that pause. Oh, and his hand coming up like this. That's like artistic flair, but it's like, you know when you feel it and you just have to do something, right? And it's like, I like that. Alright, so first page, I mean the etude repeats a lot like this, so I think all my comments here will probably stand for a majority of things that are gonna go on. The first thing I note about CATEEN's playing is that he's very, very consistent with the tempo. I'm not gonna try to play it, but he's very consistent. Other pianists like to push and pull the tempo a little bit, right? At certain points, like with the these parts, they like to pull a little and then like push a little bit back up. Like Catene keeps it very consistent, and so it has a feeling of just constantly driving forward. I know with Chopin, right, there's a lot of tempo manipulation, but also part of the art is knowing when not to manipulate the tempo. If I remember correctly, he's going to mess with the tempo a little bit later, but it's interesting, like already in the first iteration of this sort of motif, he's already shown us that he wants to be driving to the end. Other thing to note is, again, very nicely voiced. Right? Like these are very, or like heavy in the way that they need to be, but is also, it's like, this is such a Catene thing. One of the things I love the most about Catene is just how light his touch is and how light the tone that he generates is. And you really feel that from the right hand. It's like very sparkly and very bright. And you get the, like all the important notes, all the top notes as it oscillates back and forth are standing up and like coming out a little bit more strongly above the other ones to give the right hand almost like a little bit of a phrase, while you have the, you know, Chopin's literally in those like first 4 measures just going between the 1 and the 4 chord. And even though it's repetitive, Catene is carrying a sort of melody that goes along with it. Well, let's listen to it again. And then we'll keep going because the rest of it is very similar. And I'll make some comments about like what he's doing here and there. Breath. You see him pause and breathe. That's so important. Ooh, look how light his touch has become, right, in the left hand. And then a little bit of weight as he pushed, like, slight pull. You also notice, this is actually interesting observation. Even though the notes keep going back and forth, he's not playing with a strong like rotation from the forearm. He's initiating most of the movement from the fingers. Obviously, this could be a very tiny sort of movement that he's doing right here, but suffice it to say, it's smaller than a lot of other people who I've seen. He's not coming super high off the keys because you can't with how fast it's going, but it gives it a certain tonality, a certain sparkle, like kind of what I talked about earlier. Ooh, so light, dude. And now this is where it becomes heavy, right? Like the left hand. It's like the right hand is carrying like this certain texture and it sweeps up and down, but the left hand is what's changing in weight and driving us like the difference in dynamics. You even see him coming a little bit from above, and he's like using literally just his hand weight, arm weight to come down on top of the keys. And that is already more than enough because of how light he's playing up top here. One thing to always remember about dynamics is that dynamics are not like absolute points. I talk a lot on stream about how dynamics are ranges, but also something that should be noted is dynamics are also relative. Dynamics are relative to one another. If you have an entire section in piano or pianissimo and suddenly you play like a forte, it will probably come across stronger as a fortissimo simply because the entire piece is at a pianissimo, right? And there's greater contrast because of that. And so because Catene's entire right hand is so light, and even when it does build and when it like drops in dynamic, like even with the pushing the fortes, pushing the mezzo fortes, and then with the diminuendos, and then like a little bit of a crescendo, all these things is with such light articulation that even just a bit in the left hand is enough to make it feel like that bona fide forte, to feel heavier and gluier than the right hand, which is very sparkly. Having a sparkly touch, I've talked about that in one of my Mozart videos from way back when. That's like the contrast in the two touches in the right hand and in the left hand, and how that plays with the dynamics here as well. Ooh, you see lifting high to connect? That's something I've done before too, like lifting the fingers very like precisely in order to connect the notes to almost give myself an impression of gluing things together. And you see he's still maintaining consistent tempo. Hasn't pulled very noticeably yet. And look, there's a bit of digging in right now. Ah, such nice, delicate phrasing. Where do I even start with that section? I have to listen to it again. Gosh, this was so good. Again, if you want to hear this all the way through, like before I watch this analysis or after you watch this analysis, go and actually watch the video and support the guy, because some good stuff. Right, here we go. Like Chopin switches the runs into the left hand, and you can already hear almost like a change in touch that CATEEN'S using. The left hand isn't quite as sparkly as the right hand, and it sounds like he's gluing it a little bit more heavily. It feels heavier because right now there's accents in the right hand, right? According to the score, there's accents in the right hand. There's a slur written over the left hand with these runs. And this whole section is coming off of perhaps a lighter section with more mellow sweeps. We switch into the left hand. What does CATEEN do? But glue the left hand more strongly than he does the right hand in order to create contrast. You get that contrast, you get a heavier feeling because of that. He's not necessarily playing heavier, although it does look like he's digging a little bit. He looks like he's digging into the keys a little bit with like this sort of run, and that takes a lot of energy and a lot of fortitude. But on top of that, he's also has these accents in the right hand. And so to support that, everything now has become louder, more glued together. Again, I've said this before countless times, but notes that are held longer feel louder. Notes that are held shorter feel quieter to a certain extent. And now if we keep going, ooh, immediate switch, right? The score here has written mezzo forte, and a lot of people switch to mezzo forte, and that's fine, right? From forte to mezzo forte, but CATEEN almost drops it down to a piano, right? It drops all the way down, and it creates this contrast. Again, he's playing a lot with the dynamics rather than pushing and pulling the tempo. He's manipulating the musicality of this piece from a dynamic standpoint more strongly than he is from a tempo standpoint. And here it is. Now it's written piano, slightly building, right? And the right hand has become more gluey now as well. And now we begin to feel a little bit of the pulls, right, from the left hand, like in tempo. And do you see what he's doing with his left hand? So he had to go 1-1 for two of those notes. And then like the other notes that he plays are with flat fingers. Why is he playing with flat fingers? He's playing with flat fingers lifted high in order to get, again, a gluey feeling. Because he's playing, right, he's letting one of these notes very slightly, barely perceptible, probably only noticeable to him. But essentially, it's like this key, this F, is being glued into the D. And this sort of hand motion, yeah, sure, it's incorrect playing. And again, I would never teach anyone who's a beginner to play like this at all. But CATEEN knows what he's doing. That's the difference. And this here helps him achieve a certain tone. And the tone is he wants to glue it together in a flat, controlled sort of way. So he doesn't want to articulate, like almost accented feel, but he wants a very smooth, connected feel. And so as a result, this key is almost like bleeding into this next one. And this comes off the back of having to go 1-1, which makes a lot of sense because 1-1 you can't connect. He's connecting with the pedal, yeah, and he's also holding the note as long as he can in order to create as much of that connection as possible. But now he really wants to emphasize that connect by playing with that flat finger lifted high. And then again, right? This time he rotates the hand to get that sort of like articulation and accent. Oh, the drop. And when he lands on those notes, you see him driving in with arm weight, right? You see him driving in with weight on the accents, like, right? So important, weight management. And look, okay, here we go. Now this is really heavy. Do you hear the change in tonality? How it's like actually like heavier now? Like he's not playing necessarily slower. Maybe he is by like a tiny fraction on the back of the beat. But like now it sounds a lot heavier because this is the contrast from the beginning. This theme has come up once already, and the first time you played it, it was light. It was light and loud, but now it's heavier and loud. And you can see a little bit of that weight going into the keys. When you're playing like fortissimos and stuff like this at like high speeds, the only way to do that is, again, lifting the fingers high or higher, as high as possible in order to get that like sort of strike into the keys, but also driving tons and tons of weight into keys while you're playing. And of course, this becomes incredibly taxing on the forearm. And so right now, that's what he's doing, right? It's hard enough to play this entire piece with dynamics and like at the tempo that he is, consistently. In fact, some of the times why you pull the tempo is, yeah, artistic, but also to give yourself a bit of rest. Cateen doesn't really pull the tempo really noticeably, right? As we said before. But now on top of that, he's driving weight into his fingers, into the keys, while playing at that same consistent tempo to create that textural difference. This guy's something else. I mean, if you haven't seen his Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, maybe that's a review video for another time, but like, dang, it's something else. And now, of course, lighter again, right? But much more connected now. And his accents are coming up to a higher peak now as well. Sits up. You gotta readjust for the finale, dude. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. And now it's tons of weight going into the keys, right? Now slowly drop, slowly drop. He's leaning forward, right? You see that, like, the tension, like, the moment he strikes? It's like, it's interesting, because I had that conversation with, like, a teacher once before. And he's done research into, like, stuff that Whiteside taught and, like, people of that nature and like playing technique and stuff like that. And one of the things that came out in the conversation is like how bracing the core helps us play fortissimo. And without getting into like the details of something like that, you do see that the body needs to be able to tense and relax at certain points in order to create certain dynamics. And we see that with Cateen towards the end, right? Like in order to play these sorts of like heavy accented fortissimos, he's leaning forward, right? Why does he suddenly lean forward? Yes, because it's building intensity, but also because he's putting more weight into the keys. Why does he like suddenly like, looks like he flinches, right? Like that, like you see right there as he like tenses up, that's because he has to drive weight into the keys to create more of a fortissimo, to create that accent. And now here, leaning in, right? The tension. And then, of course, down and out, right? Natural, like, follow-through of the motion. But, yeah, I mean, just the dynamic control is really something else. Right, like, the entire time, like, perhaps this is not the fastest rendition of, like, Winter Wind. But it is a very, like, clean, like, faithful representation of, like, what the score is saying, but also has a lot of, it sounds like Cateen. It sounds like Cateen, you know? When you listen to other Cateen things, you're like, dang. Like, yeah, I don't know, there's something to it, right? With the touch and the tonality and the way that he applies weight, as I described in this video. And perhaps even in other ways that I don't understand myself because I'm not Cateen. He's just levels, like tiers beyond me. Yeah, I mean, we could talk for days about like the specific phrasings, like da 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 dum bum bum da 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 dum, right? Like these things come up higher. It's like two voices interacting, and you hear that with Cateen's playing, and they're like bum ba da dum bum bum bum. Like even when this motif comes up again and again, it like rings out like a bell. It's almost like, you know, going with the Winter Wind theme. I don't know who named this, whether it was Chopin or someone else like posthumous or whatever. You almost hear like dum bum ba bum as like this like bell that rings out through a snowstorm, and all the other notes come rushing down. And these other notes in the right hand aren't carrying the melody per se, right? Because it's carried by the dum bum ba bum bum, but they all have a contour. They have a contour that's contributing a certain movement and a certain drive to the piece, and you have to shape that dynamically. You have to shape that with emphasizing the important notes. You have to shape that in so many different ways, and Cateen does that really, really well. Again, as I said before, there are tons of other fantastic performances of this, but personally, I really, really enjoy Cateen's. This is a whole lot of fun. Maybe I'll do more classical in the future, because classical is some good stuff, even if it gets a little bit heated when people talk about this. I feel like I'm tired just watching him play. Like, what? Alright, thanks for making it to the end of this video. I hope you really got something out of it, and I hope that it helps you understand a little bit more of what's going on behind a performance like Cateen's. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe to let me know that I should make more of these. If you would like to support the channel, you can now do so via Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. Links for those are in the description. You can also support the channel by getting Watkey's merch. Link for that is also in the description. And be sure to catch my live streams on Saturdays, where I basically do this analysis, except on your videos, to help you guys out. But yeah, if you would like to see more of my analysis on other people's playing, you should click right here. If you would like to hear me play, I'd be flattered, then you should click right here. But until next time, everybody, peace.